Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Kalpesh from IIC. After the hugely informative bird's eye view of the climate tech world, it's now time for a deep dive into a sector that presents both a great challenge and a huge opportunity. We are talking about agriculture and food. Agriculture contributes about 14% of India's greenhouse gas emissions, and it is estimated that about 22% of the economic impact caused by natural disasters will be borne by the agri sector alone. It is clear that the sector is ripe for interventions from startups at different points in the value chain. But can agtech solutions have a positive impact on climate and livelihoods both? And how do we ensure a wider adoption of climate resilient products in India? To find answers to these and many more questions on the sector, we have with us this evening a prominent mix of equity investors, bankers, consultants, and entrepreneurs, each a thought leader in the sector. The session will be moderated by Manpreet Singh, who is the Climate Change, Sustainability, and CSR Services Global Leader at KPMG. KPMG is a global provider of risk, financial, and business advisory, as well as services in tax, regulatory, internal audit, and corporate governance. Joining him on the panel is Arindam Datta, Executive Director, Rural and Development Banking and Advisory, Rabobank. Rabobank offers a wide array of products and services to clients based on its cooperative roots and its deep understanding of food and agribusiness, as well as the renewable energy sector. Next up is Hemendra Mathur, Venture Partner at Bharat Innovation Fund and co-founder Think Ag. Bharat Innovation Fund is a venture capital fund focused on deep tech investments in emerging sectors, while Think Ag is a not-for-profit platform for accelerating adoption of innovation in agriculture. The next speaker is Jinesh Shah, founder and managing partner at Omnivore, which is one of the largest agri-focused impact funds in India and has been actively investing since 2011. On the panel, we also have Mahesh Yagnaraman, country director at Acumen. Acumen provides patient capital to businesses whose products and services are enabling the poor to transform their lives. And finally, we have Venu Polineni, managing director at Teluris Biotech. Teluris is working for crop protection and productivity through eco-friendly sustainable nematicides and plant growth promoters. A gentle reminder to the audience that we will very soon have a parallel sector deep dive into the energy sector running in Audi 1. So those of you who are keen on the energy sector may please hop into Audi 1. With those words, a very warm welcome to all the panelists, and over to you, Manpreet.
Thank you very much, Kalpesh, and good evening, everyone. I welcome all the panelists to discuss about this very interesting as well as very important topic on climate smart agriculture. As Kalpesh has already said in the context that in agriculture sector today not just contributes to GHG emissions and therefore global warming, but is the most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, which are going to play a big role in terms of ensuring food security in the future. So I think one of the things that probably I want to take back from this panel, and I think the representation of this panel is really high powered, and I'm sure we are going to get very strong practical insights from everyone there. I'll try to on audience's behalf get the kind of information that we usually don't find in the public domain, but rests with these experts who are there on this panel today. Therefore, I think without really spending more time on setting the context, because we all who are participating in this session are aware on how important it is for India in particular to look at safeguarding its farmers, the whole agriculture sector, and ensure food security going forward in the future in light of some of the natural disasters that we've been seeing more recently becoming more frequent and intense. I think it is the opportune time for us to look at the ways in which we are today looking at agricultural practices and what probably is required from the perspective of safeguarding, as I said, our farmers and the food for all in the future. So without further ado, let me first invite Arindam. Maybe if every speaker, when I call you out one by one, to kindly introduce yourself, the area that in which you're working currently, and what are your perspectives and thoughts on climate smart agri, and the perspectives that you would like to share with the audience today that you have learned through working and also operating with different kinds of stakeholders in the sector. I'll start with you, Arindam.
Thanks, Manpreet. My name is Arindam and I represent Rabobank. Rabobank is a Dutch cooperative bank and it's the world's largest financial institution in the food and agribusiness sector. And importantly, it's also been rated the most sustainable bank among all the global financial institutions by Sustainalytics on ESG parameters. Now, climate is extremely important for us as a financial institution because most of our exposure is on the food and agribusiness sector. Now, having said that, what we do is we work with the clients to do an assessment of the climate footprint. So we in turn understand the risk that we are taking on our balance sheet from a climate perspective. That's one. So it's extremely important for all businesses, starting from the farmers to the large corporates and the retailers to consumers, the impact of climate that's going to happen to us. Second aspect of this climate issue is that of business development, that how can we change our business models to adapt to the challenges of climate. And again, it starts from the farmers itself to understand that what seed, what kind of soil, water, weather, components go into growing, and for the entire supply chain to be able to do the business in a climate smart manner. The third pillar, I would say, is knowledge, and that's the most complex one. I would say, because knowledge is evolving by the day. We are understanding more and more about the impact of climate and the different ways in which we can mitigate the risk of climate. So, and that's evolving, and that's where I would request all businesses who are involved in agriculture, why agriculture, any other sector, is to be able to build up knowledge around climate and the way it impacts the supply chain in the sector that they work in. The fourth is about reporting. That how do we measure the impact of climate? How do we measure it, and how do we, inform our internal and external stakeholders, including the regulators, of the climate footprint that we are either making or preventing in the business that we do. So it's extremely important to be able to get the reporting part right. Again, there the complexity is lack of uniform standards. Standards are getting developed, and second is the taxonomy. The global taxonomy around climate is a big challenge. There are different kind of definitions used by different countries and different institutions to be able to come with a uniform taxonomy on climate issues. Now, I would say that to be able to address the climate challenge, two aspects I'd like to stress on are extremely important. The first is about partnership. That's SDG 17. That how do we, the private sector, work with the development sector and the government to be able to do this? Because we need to unlock trillions of dollars of financing to be able to mitigate the climate challenge. And the private sector or the government or the public sector cannot do it on its own. We need to all work together, including the academia and the research institutions. So partnership is extremely important. The second aspect is technology. Climate is complex. There are multiple variables at work, specifically in food and agribusiness. And without technology, the use of technology, adoption of technology by all players in the supply chain, again starting from the farmers to the consumers, the transaction cost of addressing the challenges of climate change would be simply too high. So partnership and technology is a must. Now, what is it we do? I'll talk specifically about India. Now, we are introducing different financial instruments in the Indian market for climate smart agriculture. 3 years back with USAID, we introduced India's first climate smart financing program. The end use for that was forestry and land use, and we have two impact funds or NBFCs who are fronting them. Then on the 23rd of September this year, we are introducing our India COVID response fund for agri transition, and two end use within that fund would be on specifically on food loss and second is on renewable energy at the farmers level. Uh, so this is going to be the first such facility in India to be addressing food loss and renewable energy in agriculture. This is being fronted by DFC, Development Finance Corporation, the guarantee arm of the US government. We have three financing institutions in India who are fronting it. Anybody who's interested, please do get in touch for the launch program we have, which is being hosted by IIC again on the 23rd of September. And lastly, I would say that sometime in November, along with IKEA Foundation, we are introducing a $60 million, approximately 500 crore program specifically for regenerative agriculture and circular use in agriculture. So again, this would be the first such facility in the Indian market addressing the issue of regenerative agriculture at the farmers level. So that's the work we do. We try to work with multiple partners, global and local, to be able to unlock finance from Indian mainstream institutions, specifically on climate financing. So I will stop here for the time being. Over to you, Mantri.
Thanks, Arindam. Spoken like a banker. You've said so many terms. I'm sure I'm filled with questions. I'll come back to you. Hemendra, if I can come to you now.
Thanks, Manpreet, and thanks IIC for this opportunity. So I'm Hemendra Mathur. I wear multiple hats. I co-founded a platform called Think Ag. It's a not-for-profit platform which helps startups in agriculture and food space to connect with wider ecosystem, essentially corporates, investors, incubators, policymakers. I am also a venture partner with a fund called Bharat Innovation Fund. It's an early stage deep tech fund. We invest in multiple sectors at the pre-series and series A level. Specifically on climate, I am advising a couple of funds, both late stage funds from outside India, to look at investment opportunities in India. So if there are entrepreneurs with good solutions listening to this call, please do reach out to me. All I want to say at the beginning, I'm sure we're going to discuss that in detail during the webinar. Most of us think that climate is problem of tomorrow, but all I can say as far as agriculture is concerned, it is probably today's problem. And unless we look at it with some bit of urgency, we are going to be in a very difficult position. And that's where I believe this decade, 2021 to 2030, is going to be very critical for Indian agriculture. If we can't solve it in next 5 to 10 years, we have a huge problem coming our way. And how do we solve it? And I think Arindam made some very good points on this. So what I say, approach called PPE, P for policy, P for partnership, and E for entrepreneurship. I think if we can bring this together, we have a solution. As far as entrepreneurship is concerned, I see enough innovations happening in India as well as outside India. So I don't think there is any dearth of technology. The question is, how do we drive adoption among farmers, especially smallholder farmers? And that's where the role of policy and role of partnerships comes in. I think that's going to be extremely critical to drive any climate resilient practice in India. And all I want to say that, I think it's a good forum. We should figure out if we can, build on this conversation to build multi-stakeholder engagements. I think that is what Arindam was also saying. How do we get financial institutions in? How do we get state governments in? How do we get startups in? And then, demonstrate success at some level, So I think that is probably a good beginning to drive this solution in the market. I'll stop here and probably come back again on this.
Thanks, Hemendra. Thank you very much. Jinesh, can I come to you now?
Sure. Thanks, Manpreet. Thanks, IIC, for the opportunity to speak here. I mean, I represent a fund called Omnivore, which is a food and agri fund. We invest into early stage startups focused on solving the smallholder farm agriculture problems. I mean, it's a sector focused fund. And we've been running this fund on a theory of change, saying that whatever we do should increase the wealth of the Indian farmers, make them more profitable. We believe that the agri sector needs to become more resilient because of the inherent issues we have it. The sector also needs to focus on sustainability because if we are not able to do this in a more sustainable manner, it's a matter of time that the smallholder farmers will get a major shock. And the fourth pillar of which is probably now becoming the centermost is the climate change. I mean, whatever we do at Omnivore should be pro-climate, right? And I believe that climate agriculture is such a sector which contributes to the climate as a problem, but is also, if we are not able to resolve this, it can become a bigger disaster for these people, stakeholders in the agri sector, right? And whenever such change happens, the climate change is for real. I mean, the poor and the vulnerable section of the agri sector would be maximum which impacted, right? The 20%, 25% of the Indian farmers who are at the marginal level would have the biggest impact around it. And everyone's trying to do the bit about improving the response of agriculture and India as a whole on the climate change. But unless we do a real innovation, I mean, most of the startups we are doing are focused on solving a technology problem or a market platform. But there's a dearth of making a real innovation saying that can we make seeds which are relevant for the drought as a tolerant, because climate, we will see issues of rain precipitation getting lower and lower over a period of time. We also have to figure out, we are seeing a climate change even today, right? Where we are seeing the rain coming in a short duration, but with a spurt. So we don't know how the farmers are getting prepared. So in spite of having a decent rain, farmers are left high and dry to not get enough yield. So the climate change is for real. And the government, the private sector, all have been talking around it. But I think it's time for the entrepreneurs to come out with a clean slate and figure out what's the best way they can contribute towards the agri sector, right? Because what has been done over the last few decades, I mean, if the same stakeholders continue to do the same thing, I don't think results are going to be different. So entrepreneurs who are coming with and for the first time, right? I mean, Indian agri sector has got great talent, right? I mean, 5-7 years ago, we would not get the talent what we are seeing today. The number of IITs, number of IIM graduates who are talented, worked into global organizations, are trying to figure out what best can be done, right? And if such talent is available, there is definitely a potential that climate change, which is a problem, can also become an opportunity for not only the entrepreneurs, but for all stakeholders, including the farmers. I mean, that's the opening remark I would like to make it, I mean, Manpreet.
Thanks, Dinesh. Absolutely. I think you're sitting in the helm of technology, so I'm going to come back to you with a bit more details on that. Mahesh, can I come to you now?
Yeah, sure. Thanks a lot, Manpreet, and thanks to IAC. I think firstly, I represent Acumen. I'm the country director for Acumen. The way I can kind of say it, I think people before me, they are giants on this. Arindam, Hemendra, and Jinesh have been working in this much longer, and they have articulated a lot. So I'm really not going to repeat any of that. And one only thing I want to just say is, in 2018, I mean, we did a bit of a strategy exercise internally and looked outside and felt this focus on smallholder farmer. And I distinctly remember we just said smallholder farmer. And I'm very honest to admit that. I mean, we didn't even put the word climate at that time. And in 2 to 3 years now, when we actually look at that, and Jinesh mentioned that it's going to impact, and say we just see that it's already impacted. So it's not something about future. And how it is too central for us. The area of focus of smallholder along with climate in my mind is interwoven. They're already facing the most unbelievable amount of distress which is coming from that. And also, I also think I genuinely agree with what Jinesh said, that the innovations have to go to the next level. We have seen certain types of innovations and there needs to be more on this. It doesn't mean there are not good enterprises. There's a lot of good enterprises, a lot of good technology. It doesn't mean that we need something totally new, but there are a lot more models needed, and we are very excited to be in this space. At the same time, very honest and humble to know that we need to do a lot on the enterprise part of PPE, as Hemendra said, and then the others too can definitely are needed to build it up, and looking forward to this conversation. Thanks.
Thanks, Mahesh. Venu, if I can come to you now.
Yeah, thank you, IIC, for having me on this panel. And good evening, everyone. I'm Venu Polineni, and I manage a startup called Teleris Biotech India. And I think we can no longer call it a startup because we are a little bit in the scale-up stage. And I'd like to echo the sentiments of Mr. Jinesh and Mr. Mahesh, basically about how small land holding is a key. I mean, is what we have to focus on, because it is an India focused fund. Globally, obviously, there's a lot more precision ag and everything that can be applicable because of the larger land holding. But here in India, small land holding is key. And definitely agree with the climate change aspect as well, because as we are seeing, I mean, in very recent times, a warmer climate is bringing in a lot more pests that are more resilient and more damaging. The two most recent examples I can give is fall armyworm on maize and your desert locust that kind of destroyed crops left, right, and center. So what can be done in terms of from an agri input side, from an entrepreneurship side, that's focusing, I mean, we focus on pure pest. I mean, we come from a pest angle. We study the pest very in detail, and then see how we can target the pest and be safe to the environment as well, and bring out technologies. And all our technologies are completely green, and we pride ourselves on sustainability. And it's a very, very circular thing that one of the panelists has spoken about. For example, there needs to be intense research focused on, research pockets where we can actually test new molecules or new technology that can focus on pests more effectively and lead to less. Pest resistance also has increased, right? Earlier, if you have a patent, you could actually monetize the patent for out of the 20 years, you could at least monetize it for 15 to 18 years before the pest could acquire good resistance. Now, according to the most recent research, even pest resistance has kind of gone really high, and within 5 years, you're looking at pest resistance. In addition to that, the technology that is being used to target a lot of pests is quite old, the chemistry. Most of them are off patent, and that leads to higher increase in pesticide usage, very high increase in fertilizer usage, more than what is necessary. And the byproduct of that is higher release of your methane gas, production of your pesticide that can actually increase your greenhouse gas emissions. And it's all circular. It comes back to the increase in number of pests, and it leads to the stakeholder who is the farmer, leading to using more pesticide to target the pest effectively. So it all comes back to that, and then again the circle repeats. So we have to break that chain somewhere, come up with technologies that can effectively target pests. And obviously, developing technology is a cost-intensive process, but we have to develop technologies that can be even that are more economically viable to our small landholding farmers as well. If you have a great technology, but it's costing hundreds and thousands of dollars, it won't reach the farmer. So that should be the focus of entrepreneurs as well, I guess. Tying up to the whole climate thing, the better the technology, the better the effect on your target pest, and the greener the technology, the lesser use of pesticides, lesser greenhouse gas emission, and safer environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Venu. I think each one of you brought like a different perspective altogether. I think I'm glad that we have such diversity in the panel. So, Arindam, I'll come back to you. You spoke about a lot of things that from a banker's perspective you've been able to manage, and I think you spoke about partnerships as one important area. So, when you say partnerships, are you also partnering with the government agencies locally, or are these partnerships usually between just the investors and the financial institutions? But not really, with the larger stakeholder landscape. Would you want to elaborate more on who should be the ideal partners given the problem, which is climate change, given the sector, which is agriculture? How should partnerships, how in your opinion and what you've seen of the partnerships that you've done would work, for India as a geography?
Right. Thanks, Manpreet. Now, when I talked of partnership, I think that the issue was also addressed by the others, that we need the government from a policy perspective and also from a capital perspective to be able to efficiently address the climate issues, because as I mentioned, it requires trillions of dollars globally, and India will require billions of dollars in the next 5 to 10 years, right? So the government by itself, however, has limited capital. So it has to leverage private sector capital. So the government and the private sector needs to work together so that the government can bear a lot of risk while the private sector opens up or unlocks its capital. Now, it's not only a relationship between the government and the private sector to unlock capital. As Venu mentioned, the research institutions, the universities need to play a very, very important role in coming up with solutions which are commercially viable, and solutions which can be adopted by entrepreneurs and by the farmers and by the supply chain players. So extremely critical also to have the research institutions and the universities. The development sector plays a huge role. We heard from Acumen Mahesh the role that organizations like Acumen and others play, or the large NGOs which we are working with, large farmer bases, the farmer producer organizations, that they need to be able to transfer a lot of knowledge to the farmers, to the first level of processing on both mitigation, adaptation, and resilience of what it means, what the implications are, what kind of technology needs to be used. And when I talk of technology, digital technology is a must. And I'm sure that Hemendra will speak more about that, but also real technology, the technology that evolves from research institutions. Now, the way we work in all the structures that we have, that we use capital from the development sector, from international foundations and development sector players, and from the US government and the British government through FCDO or DFC, and they provide the risk tools to Indian financial institutions, who in turn unlock capital, and they provide local currency funding to FPCs, to tech companies, to SMEs who are working with large farmer bases or with renewable energy solution providers, because they need to build up relationships with the farmers to be able to take care of the physical risk and the transition risk. So it's very, very important that capital is made available. And the important thing about the capital being made available is it's not only the issue of underwriting, but also capital to be provided using the climate lens. That's extremely important. That is what we are trying to bring to the Indian financial institutions, is to be able to do agriculture lending using the climate lens. Because as we know in India, from a policymaker's perspective, from the RBI's perspective, inclusive financing through priority sector and other initiatives have got a big boost. But climate financing, environment financing is something very new. It's still to be adopted by the Indian financing institutions. The investors are ahead, the equity investors are ahead of the game, because most of the capital, the LPs are from Europe or US. They are extremely demanding so far as, the climate impact is concerned of the investments which are being made by the funds. But from a debt perspective, Indian financial institutions need to imbibe, and we need to have regulations on, climate footprints.
Right. Thanks. Thank you very much for that, Arindam. And I think you also spoke about awareness, which I thought was quite important in the perspective that while we may have funds, while the intent may be there, but is it really making a difference at the farmer level? Are they able to understand what needs to be done and why? And does climate really matter to them? I think that's what leads me to Hemendra. I mean, what do you think? How important is climate when you've been thinking of innovation at your Bharat Innovation Fund or Think KG, where you're applying or trying to build solutions to various kinds of systems within the sector? Have you seen, or are you also considering climate change and climate implications? And if yes, then what is it that you've been doing?
Manpreet, I think let's look at this climate related solutions or adoption through different lenses. Let's look at it from a startup perspective, where we invest. Of course, from ThinkEd, we have a lot of learning from a corporate perspective, how they look at it, and of course, from a perspective of financial institution, which is also very critical. From a startup perspective, all I can say, of course, climate is one important parameter, but not the most important parameter for startups. Let's be honest, there's no dearth of problems in Indian agriculture, right? Be it farmer access to markets, access to input, access to data, credit, insurance. So I think most startups are solving one of these, right? But the good part is that while they're solving for these business problems, they're also solving for climate in some ways. For example, a startup which is doing market linkage or aggregation or post-harvest storage or processing, in a way is helping reduce the food loss, right? If a startup is advising farmers when to use pesticide or how much urea you should be putting into the soil, in a way you are, reducing GHG emissions and the adverse effect of climate. So I would say climate is more of a bonus from the innovation that we see, but it's not necessarily a target, right? Having said that, I would also like to acknowledge the work done by some of the startups who have done phenomenal job in this space. So, likes of, let's say, Bharat Agri or a Fasal or a Cultivate or Yuctis, I think developed a good algorithms on advising farmers on use of water, use of pesticides, fertilizers, which has kind of optimized the use of inputs and in a way has helped the climate cause. There's a startup called Distinct Horizon, which has developed a urea deep placement machine, which has reduced the consumption of urea by 30 to 40%, right? So I think these are phenomenal innovations. There's a startup called EF Polymer, which has developed a hydrogel, which improves the ability of soil to absorb water near the root zone. So it tremendously reduces the need for water for irrigation. And of course, biological products, which I'm sure Venu can talk about. So I think there are startups who have done work on this, but I would say they need a lot of catalytic effort and catalytic capital to scale. From a corporate perspective, of course, there are a few corporates who are serious about it, but I must say that for most corporates, it is confined to boardroom discussions, annual reports, and their websites. I think it has to go out of that. I think they have to demonstrate that they really care about it. And I think one thing we should, sort of think about that the business sustainability and climate sustainability are not contradictory. They are actually two sides of the same coin. If you're driving resource efficiency, you are making balance sheet healthier, right? So I think that is how probably corporate need to be looking at it. It needs a sea change of thinking, which should translate into some action. From a financial institution perspective, I think there's a lot they can do. And I've often give this example. If you look at the priority sector lending to agriculture in India, there's a clause which says that if farmer pays the loan on time, his interest rate can be reduced from 7% to 4%. Why can't we build mechanism to incentivize farmer in a similar fashion for the farmers who adopt climate resilient practices? Can we offer them a differential rate of interest? For farmer, what is the incentive of adopting a practice which is more water efficient when water is free, and an energy efficiency practice when power is free, right? So I think we need to create financial incentives, and that's where we need to have a very out-of-the-box solution when it comes to financing. Likewise, I am also a believer that from a policy level, we need to probably start thinking of building a climate risk index or climate resilience index at an all-India level. And thankfully, we have enough weather stations and we have enough tech which can build this index. And I think we can calibrate the interest rate in different clusters depending on how their index moves over a period of time. So I think those are the solution. I don't know whether they sound practical or not, but we need to think out of the box. The conventional way of lending and financing, I don't think it's going to work. And I'm very happy Arindam talked about the guarantee facility. We need to try this innovative financing model. And frankly, banks are not willing to take any risk unless they have guarantee structures in place. I hope it kind of leads to some very innovative financing models. So I think these are the perspectives I have from these three important stakeholders, and we can come back to it after a while. Thank you.
Sure, thanks, Ravindra. I think you raised very important points as well, and I wanted to go to Jinesh, but let me go to Mahesh. Mahesh, I think you wanted to speak as well. I also thought you would probably want to speak on this topic. So let me hear you first, and then.
Yeah. No, I just want to just build on what Hemendra said. I think about the point about startups not specifically probably having a climate angle, but that's because I think the resilience angle in India, if one has to really think about it, it's actually smallholder farmers' resilience of livelihood, right? I think with the kind of earnings they have, we can talk about all the solutions, the kind of earnings they have, how much disruption they can keep having with newer and newer solutions, with the really small amount of money that they earn, and they all want to leave farming and go. And how are you going to do that? That's one part of the question. What the entrepreneur faces when they are finding a solution. And second thing is, again, as Hemendra mentioned, the whole chain is not kind of working, right? It's broken at so many places. So any entrepreneur, while they come with a solution, one solution, like even Venu will test it, is not enough, because you have to think about the rest of the chain. And you have to find a way that is configured if you think your solution is going to work. Even if you are not an expert in that field, you are not going to, but you have to think of access to market. You have to think of access to the financing. You have to think of advisory, everything. I mean, whichever part you do, if you're an input provider, you have to think of all that which the farmer will get in order to make that enterprise work. And you have to do something about it. You just can't say, I have this. So the entrepreneur is extremely focused on fixing those gaps. But I think that's kind of where it is. But I think if there is a clarity around smallholder farmer in terms of what it can do to them, I think climate resilience gets handled. And why I come to it, I'm not saying this in a escaping mode of climate as a solution, but I feel that in a very different way, farmers, I mean, you also alluded to the question, do they care about it? Of course they care, but they don't care in the manner we all talk about climate. That's the only difference. If you go to a farmer, what will be the first two concerns they will talk about? They will say there is no rain for the last 2 years. There has been flood. This has happened. This is what the farmers talk about. What does that mean? They are continuously affected by climate change. And the two things that are super important for them, which they know about and they talk about and they will, is about soil degradation, which is crazy in India. 85% of the soil getting degraded and significant impact because of that. And water they see, despite being free, they know the amount of water which is going away and how they don't not able to access when they need. So I feel that if an entrepreneur is listening to a farmer to find solutions, I think the climate is built in and they have to just be extra tuned to that and build that solution. It's not something separately they're building a climate lens. I think it's inherent, and if that sensitivity to listen to the customer or a farmer is there, I think climate solutions will come. And that's the only limited point I wanted to build on what Hemendra was saying, that entrepreneurs can play a role if they can kind of think about the core target very clearly. Another small angle I'll say, and then I'll pause for the others to kind of build on it, is that we have seen a lot of supply-based solutions. I think Jinesh will know much more. There's a lot of focus on the supply side. I mean, all the innovation solutions and all coming. I think there's also a demand side here, which I think is one of the things. I don't have an answer, but I don't see enough, except when we look at companies trying to stitch it to the marketplace and having a platform, etc. But I think the demand pulling, say, regenerative ag products or all that, it's still so nascent. There is work on that side, which has to come along with this in my mind. Either separate innovations or people are able to go across a single value chain to do. I think that's very important. That's one of the other pieces I just wanted to mention. Thanks.
Well, thanks, Manish. I think very interesting perspectives that you brought in as well. And I think I just wanted to also respond to Hemendra on that climate risk index front. I think there is some work that's happening. There is a climate vulnerability atlas that has been developed alongside a climate risk index in agriculture by the government. I'm not sure to what extent and how detailed that is, to really help make decision making. However, such attempt has been done by the government to really create some sort of a zoning and a indexing of, categorization of different kinds of climate vulnerabilities. But yes, I think if it could be detailed out further, I'm sure, that would become, and I think it's just a report, right? So if it can become like a platform or a tool where, you could enter your location, get the kind of climate information that you need. But I think more so the problem with climate change is that you need forward-looking information. You need forecasts and forecasts that are accurate, which at times are not always available. I think I was in Denmark once, and I remember that the weather forecasting was so accurate that you would know at one point in time there will be rain. and it just came at the right exact second. So, that's where I thought technology and, the way technology can actually help in the farmers in deciding and decision making is quite important. And which takes me to Jinesh. I mean, you've been at the forefront of funding technologies. So, from your perspective, have you seen, technologies also focusing on the climate side of things? I mean, of course, there is a difference in weather and climate. I mean, weather data is still possible for you to predict. Climate change is not. And how are, in fact, in any of your tech solutions that you funded, have you come across that? And also, increasingly, so I would want to ask whether climate concerns would be a criteria for evaluation, when you go for funding, the new kind of tools and startups and technologies.
So thanks, Manpreet, for the question. I mean, look, climate had been inherent right from beginning about when we do at agriculture, right? Because like what Mahesh mentioned, right? Climate is inherent to agriculture. Water, soil are the two basic foundation for agriculture, and that has been completely screwed up in the India for last few decades, right? So it has been inherent. So water omnivore does anyway has to be pro climate, but we have taken bets in terms of increasing the resilience, right? We have done a company like Skymet to do weather forecasting. We've done a company like Gramco to reduce the risk of farmers trying to do a crop insurance or get an insurance in case the crops fail, right? We also have taken bets in a company like Krishi Tantra, which is a soil testing company. I mean, soil is such a strong foundation, and we are in a complete bad shape, right? No matter what technology we use, if the soil is not going to be recipient of that inputs, no matter what biotech does or what anyone wants to do, it's not going to work out, right? I mean, soilless agriculture in India is not going to work for next 10 years for sure. I mean, so it is inherent part of it, right? Even the companies which are like market focused companies trying to do a farmer platform, their intent is to get more and more produce with them. And how do you get them, right? They're increasing the yield of the same customers. You cannot go to new and new farmers every year and say, get me the demand or supply side of it, right? We would want to give them a right advice. They want to reduce the cost of inputs by like what Venu was mentioning, right? Trying to optimize the amount of inputs you give, whether it's a crop protection or it's a fertilizer or bio input. You want to optimize so the cost of agriculture goes down. And in turn, if you are able to get the right market linkages for the farmers, you are able to give a better profits to farmers, who in turn would then be willing to listen to your advice and my advice. If the farmer is not able to get his family getting 2-3 square meals a day, I mean, you and I could talk about climate for ages, but nothing's going to work out. So everything needs to combine together, and all the startups, I mean, rest assured, right? Every startup, even if they're just focusing on the demand supply of the food produce, they are inherently thinking around it. They are thinking how best I can optimize around it. What is the best for doing about it? And I think companies like Fasal, which has been focusing on water optimization and input optimization, they are trying to gamify, like what Hemendra was saying, that we need to talk about new ways of telling a farmer. So if you are able to tell a farmer that with this technology, you are able to save 500,000 liters of water annually, right? He understands the value of water, right? I mean, so everyone working around it. And I think I like what Arindo mentioned around it, right? While the farmers directly would not really worry about how financing is happening, but if you are able to give this to an entrepreneur who wants to create wealth for himself and probably build a nation, he is more greedy and selfish to bring all this thing together. So his cost of doing business farmer will go down, and it in turn will help the sector. So I think it's going to work together. And unless everything comes together, including the government support, the climate problem is not going to go away, right? We will not be able to convert this problem to an opportunity. And Manpreet, I think, to be honest, whether startup, whether Omnivore is funded or not, none of the startup wants to destroy the agriculture sector. They don't want to destroy the climate. So I think with right talent, with lot of focus as a country, as a community, I think we believe that the climate problem is going to turn into an opportunity in the next few years. I mean, that's a genuine hope, and I believe that's going to happen.
Well, certainly, I think we all wish so, Jinesh, for sure. And I think there is a connected sort of a audience question. I think, Jinesh, I think that you would be the right responder for that. So there's a question. Climate is seen as complex, and within that, agri even more so, with need for deep sectoral knowledge. So are agri sector focused funds the right way to go for making such investments? So I think the question is clearly, the marriage between climate concerns and agricultural output. So
Look, I mean, let me attempt it and be very straight about it, right? I mean, everyone works if you are rewarded well, right? The entrepreneur is rewarded well if I am willing to take a risk on him, right? He's not going to take a risk of his own capital and do that, right? So unless there's an agri sector focused fund who's talking of climate, talking of agriculture, no one's going to go and take a risk, right? I mean, Venu is not going to start running and putting his sweat and blood if no one's going to give him money. I mean, unless banks give him money, unless VCs give him money. So, of course, while the sector focused fund individually cannot solve all the problems, it is definitely part of the puzzle, right? And we do solve piece of it. But unless I'm supported by good entrepreneurs, unless I'm supported by good accelerators, people like Arindam who can give me debt from my portfolio. I mean, people like Hemendra who really mentors entrepreneurs. It's sometimes it just requires a lot of patience. I mean, and I heads off to Hemendra to work with the entrepreneurs at a grassroots level. So unless everyone comes together, we will not solve it. A sector focused fund with understanding of climate is definitely part of the puzzle. That's what I would put it.
Thanks, Dinesh. And Venu, I'll come back to you on this now. I mean, of course, a lot has been said, different perspectives made, but you brought in a very unique perspective around, dealing with the pests. And of course, there are definitive predictions around, how pests are becoming more common. You gave examples of what recently happened and so on. So, what role is biotech really playing? Are you looking at developing more climate resilient varieties of crops? Are you attempting to do that, or are you working on developing chemicals or solutions of further pesticides to save some of these crops from these problems that exist today from these kinds of sources? I just wanted to get some bit of more clarity on what is the work that you're really doing, which is really contributing towards that.
Yeah, I'll just touch upon a couple of points there. Definitely climate resilient crops are at the need of the hour. We are not doing that at this point. We are more targeting the pest. But in a using green technology, basically, let's say we are using the same pesticides right now. There is clear research of about 200 million pounds of active ingredient used only in California alone. I mean, imagine how much is being used in India. So we have to look at targeted pest control. We have to definitely, because most of the pesticides or crop inputs these days are broad range. They contact anything around it, they just basically sterilize the whole area. They kill everything that comes in contact. So you need to focus more on targeted pest control. And we, at our company at least, we are focusing on novel peptides that target a specific pathway in the pest itself, in the pest that we are dealing with. Right now, we are working with nematodes, and we are working with a couple more major pests, fall armyworm and pink bollworm. So these pests, we're targeting specific pathways in the pest, not one, at least two different pathways. That way, the pest also takes a lot more time to develop any kind of resistance to our solution. There are solutions available that are already in the market in terms of for your insect control or pest control, but most of them are broad range, targeted. They kill multiple things at the same time, and from there you have to look at dosage as well. In India, especially, there is a belief from the farmer side. We have to do a lot of awareness programs for the farmers to say that this is the lethal dose. You use 2 mg of a particular thing and it will kill the pest. But once a farmer sees a pest, if 2 mg can kill the pest, why not 5 mg, just because we're getting it for cheaper? And then that basically increases the use of pesticide. I mean, I was talking to one of our sales professional a couple of days ago, and There was one village where the farmers were using, instead of 500-gram active ingredient for 500 liters, they were using 500-gram active ingredient for 150 liters of water. Imagine, I mean, you're basically tripling the use of active ingredient there. So, I mean, I'm not blaming anyone here, but there need to be a lot more awareness programs. Awareness in terms of even entrepreneurs have to be, as Jinesh said, we have to be climate focused as well. See, anything starts in the lab. From there, we take it to our greenhouse, and from there, we take it to a small farm, and from there, we took it to a larger farm. So all this can happen only, I mean, only if you are succeeding in the small scale. So when you're focusing technologies to a small land holding farmer, you can easily extrapolate that technology to a larger land holding farmer, say in the US or in Australia, and that will unlock the crazy potential of your intellectual property. That's how an entrepreneur has to think. Even an Indian entrepreneur has to think in those lands, because we export so many things. But we import intellectual property a lot, especially in the ag sector. We need to be in the forefront of that in the next 10 years, wherein we can actually license our technology in different countries and use that to target pests in a more efficient way. I mean, we have patents in 39 countries. I mean, we file for patents in 39 countries, and we are in the office actions for a lot of those patents. And we are proud of that. I mean, because if we can actually license our technology out, that can target pests very specifically at less dosage and be safer to the environment. A lot of investors, venture capitalists, angel investors, HNIs, they're all now kind of like pointing their radar at climate and also conservation and sustainability. And let's say we license our technology in a country that has a little bit more mature investor who's focused on the climate and sustainability index. Imagine the potential of investment that a company like ours can. I mean, imagine having 10 companies like ours who are focused on climate. Yeah, and to do all this, we need funding. Luckily, we had received some funding in 2019, so I could actually sit here and I mean spend some time with you guys, or else I would not have a team to be working on majority of these, and even paying for the intellectual property and the whole patent rights and everything is a costly endeavor. I mean, when funds start looking into the climate angle, starts looking into the intellectual property, and then the potential that a technology that can do what a technology can do for small land holding, extrapolate it to your larger land holding. I think that's the key. And most of if there are any entrepreneurs there, that's what you should be focusing on as well when you make your pitches and stuff about how your technology can be unlocked, not just in India. I mean, India is a huge agri country, but if you can actually show your proof of concept wherein you can unlock that potential in major development or agricultural countries, regions, then the sky's the limit. And if more companies are adopting that, then there is no way that major companies that might not be focusing on technologies like this, they will definitely have to look back into this and start working in this angle. So that's a change. A company, a small company, or even a startup can do is basically you can pivot easily. If you have started now, you can pivot easily and focus on something like this. And as more companies adopt technology, even major companies should be adopting those. And eventually, it is a very gradual thing. Maybe 10-15 years down the lane, we will see more green technologies coming in and phase out most of the harmful pesticides or anything.
I just wanted to probably catch on to the last point, when you said, which was on, I mean, the pesticide itself, right? I mean, the whole movement that we are seeing is towards organic crops, being preferred over others. and that really means no pesticides. So how important do you think pesticides will still be, and are we saying that we should not use any pesticides altogether? And how does it really connect with the whole climate implications that we are talking about right now?
Pesticides are very important, especially after so much use. Pests have become very highly resilient, and it's very hard. I mean, you can take the Sri Lanka story. I mean, they stopped import of pesticides and all agri like related pest inputs sometime about 6 months ago. Now there's severe inflation. I mean, not just due to the economic conditions, even their crop losses have been huge because the crops couldn't sustain the level or the intensity of pests. There is always going to be a hybrid. You will have to bridge. I mean, you'll have to have that hybrid wherein you can do both a minimal use or the optimum use of pesticides and your optimum use of biologicals. And it will take quite a while before we can make the complete switch. Till that point, pesticides are highly important. What I'm trying to say is it's better to make pesticides that are more green chemistry, and there is better soil degradation. The wash off is basically it doesn't have to be washed off into our water bodies and then affect the fish and other organisms. So we have to make more eco-friendly pesticides. That doesn't leave much residue in the produce, in the soil, in our waters, everything. So that was what I was trying to make. And obviously switching to organic is good. A couple of panel members have spoken about when a farmer has a stomach full, that's when only they can look into these type of things. Yeah, I mean, a good sign now in India is a lot of farmer produce organizations have come up who encourage farmers to kind of adopt a little bit more measured approach to use of pesticides, and maybe focus more usage on biologicals. And usually farmer produce organizations have somewhere around 500 to 1,000 acres that they control, or that they come under a lot of farmers. So these small changes definitely add up at some point. So we have to keep working on it. And I think at some point we will see a major shift and change.
Right. No, well said, Venu. I think there needs to be definitely a balance, and that balance need to definitely see that how do we address the problem vis-a-vis, are we really creating another problem or not? So I think the thought process really has to be forward-looking, where we are ensuring that, by addressing a particular problem, we are not creating another one. So I'm sure, that's being taken care of. Mahesh, there was an audience question on what you said. So you said, so the question is, Mahesh mentioned that farmers are clearly worried about land degradation, water, etc. So what is your view on farmers' willingness to pay for solutions, especially when investments are upfront and benefits might be uncertain? Do you want to address that?
Yeah, I'll try and address it partly. I mean, from what we have seen, and some of the portfolio companies which are trying to do solutions like that. In this, it's abundantly clear, right? I'll come from it at two angles: affordability and whether they will pay. And second is, I also want to build a little bit on this organic and zero-based and all these things which Venu talked about, and what's the pressure that puts on entrepreneurs if they have to start measuring up, and a little bit of both. And I think the first part, definitely, affordability is a challenge, and we have to accept that. I mean, it's not that they will easily. Number one, they first of all see a lot of interventions, a lot of companies now coming with solutions every day. So the thing is, what's going to be giving them some stability? First issue for them, if you really ask me, is stability. I think even Jinesh wants to add to that. Is that I think they want to see that an increase in income. I think if that is clear, then only the question of affordability comes. Second is, even then they won't afford. Many of them just swallow this card after. I think that's where access to finance and instruments is something the entrepreneurs have to think about if they are capital type of the specific question which is asking if they are capex or not. I don't think there is any other way, because from their own income, they don't have the surpluses to go into that. It is definitely access to finance, which an entrepreneur has to think as part of the solution. So, I mean, that's kind of the very simplistic answer I can give for that one. The same way, the pressure which comes on organic, zero pesticide that you asked, Manpreet, and I think Venu said absolutely rightly. And there are things like zero budget and all that. And the main thing in my mind, is reduction and showing that and measuring that over a period. I'm not an expert at all to say that this will work or not work, but I'm just saying to just jump to the next buzzword on zero budget and organic and 100% is also fraught with risk, because one of the things we are not talking about is any such switch for a farmer in a short run will mean a livelihood impact which can be adverse. And who's going to take care of that? Right? It's not, I mean, it will. It's not that obviously you switch and everything goes up. And I think we have not seen that to be the case. We see that if they adopt solutions which are more natural, more organic, overnight, it is challenging. So you need to have a process in which it moves. So it comes from a technology angle and also from an affordability and livelihood angle that you have to take that through. And that's something an entrepreneur, I think many of the entrepreneurs are aware of that. I think that's kind of what I would weigh in from both the angles.
Manpreet, can I just add? Sorry, Jinesh is let him go ahead.
I'll speak after you. Please go ahead.
Please go ahead.
Thank you so much. Okay, just to add to what Miles said, it's extremely important that we don't put the burden of climate change on the farmers, right? They are already taking more than the share of risk which they can bear, because they are taking the entire production risk on their own. So let's look at what happened in other parts of the world. And before that, what's coming out very clearly is soil, water, and weather. These three have got impacted. It's going to impact farmers, their incomes, their livelihood, which has larger social, political, and economic consequences, right? And the IPCC report recently launched in the beginning of August made it very clear that some of the changes which has happened is already irreversible. So the European example is one led by regulation and consumer pressure. Now, when I talk of regulation, if you look at the the financial landscape, the regulators there have made it very clear that now you need to report on your climate footprint. Now, it's not only for the financial services sector or for the equity investors, but it's now also for the real sector players, the input players, the output players. They all need to report on their climate footprint. So unless we have regular, and it's not that in the change in Europe and they've gone very green, it's not because they were kind-hearted, they were forward-looking, but regulation kind of accelerated the entire process, and it also brought in innovations and new kind of thought process and technology. New entrepreneurship came in because of the stringent regulation there. In India too, once we have the right kind of policies and regulations in place, the onus should not be on farmers, but the output buyers, the input players. Once they have to kind of, report on climate footprint, on what their business, the impact it's having, they will need to participate in the risk. As Mahesh said, the farmers would not be able to bear the risk, the transition risk. They need to invest at the farm field, work with the farmers. Only then change would be possible. Let's not leave it to the farmers alone. It's just not fair. It's a societal problem. It's a larger economic problem we are looking at.
Right. Thanks, Dinesh.
So, I mean, one thing, Manpreet, I would like to say that Indian farmers are not getting anything free, right? They've been paying for everything, whether it's a soil test or inputs. I mean, he's getting subsidy. He's getting subsidy not by any favor, right? Because government decides to control the price when the price goes up. So it's just a quid pro quo being done. I mean, he takes maximum risk. It's one business where he takes very risk for everything in life. And sometimes when things go right for him, government decides to stop the exports, creates a curb on the price rise, because inflation is impacting everyone. So I don't think there is a Indian farmer has been getting anything free around it. That's the point I would like to put in. And climate change is not farmers' problem, boss. It's our problem. So I mean, asking the poor guy to take all the risks and also add the farmer problem, I mean the climate problem, I mean it's going to destroy his resilience, his sustainability, right? I mean, whatever we all are trying to achieve to make agriculture more sustainable, it's going to fall flat if we're going to put in everything on his plate. I mean, we need to add equity, we need to add debt. He needs, I mean, a farmer is paying interest at 40-45% per annum. That's the kind of interest that he bears around it, right? If we can allow the bank who is paying 6 to 8% the FD rates to the depositors, if that kind of some amount of effort or some kind of interest subsidy can be given to him and make it 12-13% as a risk capital for him, I think the farmer's problem will be reduced to a large extent. I mean, the farmer is getting rogered from all sides, and I don't think we should be adding anything to his plate right now. Otherwise, we will have a crisis.
I want to make one point on the organic supply chain, just a small point. I think personally, I believe that more than organic, we have a huge opportunity in building a fair trade supply chain. When I say fair trade, and it could be from multiple perspectives. One is, of course, if a brand can say that, if you're paying 100 rupees, let's say 40% is going to farmer. Forget more or less. As long as they can transparently share that this is much is going to farmer. I think that's one big opportunity, which I don't think many brands have looked in detail. And when we look at from a climate perspective, what is the propensity of a consumer to pay for a brand which can claim, let's say, for basmati rice, that the water used in this variety of rice is 20% less than conventional use. I think there's a huge segment. We underestimate that segment. I believe at least probably India's top 15% or 20% population, which is a sizable number, is very prone to buy a product which is fairly traded. And that benefit can ultimately move down to the value chain to the farmer. So I think that is something we should think about, and I'm sure some brand would catch it, and there is enough tech available which can establish this equation that can give comfort to the consumer.
Can I just want to? I think Hemendra makes a very important point, and he also made one earlier about corporate. This is not about pointing a finger or someone else, but if you really think for a moment at a very high, one of the most important things is, and many people will know this, the packaged food suppliers in India have been resisting basic labeling several times. Basic labeling. I'm talking not even about, this is about fats and carbohydrates and declaration. 2 times, 3 times the lobby actually pushes back against FSSO, which is actually companies which make food. So I talked about the demand, and I think Hemendra pointed about that corporate is only in the boardroom. If we are not even willing to reveal that level of detail, which is not about what Hemendra is talking about, how much organic to take, or what is the water. And if we are not doing that, I'm saying, how can we create the demand side, which will help some of these supply solutions to keep pushing up? So there is a multiple dialogue involved here. And this is not, as I said, it's not to bash the corporates or something, but the lobby is pushing back on something as basic as labeling of fats and carbohydrates. And they don't want to do that. They really don't want to do that. And when that is not happening, then how are we going to push the next level, which is to actually fair trade? So I think that's one of the answers. I'm not saying it's the only answer. It's one aspect of the solution when I saw unlock. And I think at some stage in IAC, in these conversations, we should bring from their perspective what they will have. I'm sure they will have their own perspective and view on why they do what they do. I think that's important from that stakeholder aspect. Just thought I should bring the point which Hemendra himself made in terms of how that comes across.
No, sure. Thank you for doing that, Mahesh. So I think I'm cognizant of time. We have some audience questions, so let me just switch to them. One of them, I leave it to anyone in the panel to address that, as appropriate. So first question was, which businesses within agriculture sector are you most positive about in terms of positive impact and scalability in the near future? If anyone wants to take that question.
If I can say so, I think again, agri-tech is a huge area, and I don't think I have a specific answer for this question. But all I can say is we need to, if again taking a climate lens, we need to look at diverse solution. Clearly, water efficiency, energy efficiency, labor efficiency, I think that's very straightforward. But I can tell you there's much more diversity, and I'll give you a couple of examples. Honeybees, I think that is one of my favorite subjects. We are every year the number of honeybees is reducing. Of course, we don't have statistics on it, but I think in general people agree that the number of honeybees that we need for cross-pollination of crop, that number is going down. And that's where I see a huge opportunity for pollination as a service. And I'm looking for good entrepreneurs, but there are hardly one or two. But I think we need hundreds of entrepreneurs who can just promote it. I think you can build a sizable business if you can build bee boxes and just rent it out in go to hilly areas or wherever. California, which is the largest almond producing state in the US, trucks and trucks of honeybees get shipped to California so that there are enough almonds. I'm sure we are going to get into a similar situation. We are not going to get enough of a Kinnoor apple or a J&K apple if we don't have enough bees out there. So I think that's a business opportunity which to me is a white space. Another area which I like, which is again not talked about, I think is on borewell charging. A lot of our agriculture is dependent on groundwater, right? And they are depleting. There's a study which says by 2030, 45 million water borewells in India, and 50% of them are going to go dry. So a startup called Urdhvam, I think they do this low cost, affordable solution for borewell charging. It takes few thousand rupees, but it has demonstrated that the water level shoots up, with that solution. So I think there's enough diversity in the ecosystem, or there are enough white spaces. We need to look for it apart from the conventional solution when we think about climate.
Sure, certainly, Arindam. Anyone else wants to comment? Arindam, you?
Well, I think I agree entirely with Hemendra. I mean, I don't think we can look at it as, one particular subsector within agriculture where we'll put our bets on. It needs to be across because, we are one of the largest producer and also the largest consumer of food in the world. And with the population growing, I mean, UN says it's going to be 10 billion globally, but India's population is also going to be higher than what it is. So we need to be able to feed them sustainably, and we do not have any extra arable land. So we need to do with the same resources we have, in fact, use less. So whatever solutions we come up with, it needs to work across subsectors, including what in India is called the allied sector, whether it's animal protein, whether it's animal husbandry, whether it's fisheries, because sustainability is extremely critical in these sectors.
Sure, thanks for that, Arindam. And I think I have a couple of more questions, but then 3 minutes. But then, if you are okay, maybe to stretch a bit, just to answer those questions, and just get your concurrence on that, if you're okay.
Sure.
Okay, cool. So the other question that I received is, so part of climate smart agriculture is also looking at moving away from monocropping to multi-cropping. What kind of business models can tackle this? Anyone wants to?
I'll take a stab at this. Look, I mean, monocropping in India is mainly a couple of states, right, which has been more focused on paddy and wheat, right? So that's where monocropping. But in quite a few states, multi-cropping is anyways practiced, right? Because between two crops, you put a smaller vegetable crop to get income levels going up. So I think for the states which are facing monocropping challenges, I think it's definitely required for them to do it, because anyways the soils are getting dead, or maybe if they are not dead today, it's anyways in a bad shape, right? So Indian farmers, inherent by nature, are smallholder farmers, right? So not all the farmers do the same crops across at the same time. So the monocropping problem in India is not so bad. It's definitely there. If you can do two crops and you can put a vegetable crop or some kind of a pulses in the between, I think it would really help. So I think the model is not, I think, different around it. It's going to be saying, can I produce more and at the same with less resources around it?
Let me add another dimension, slightly controversial dimension here, Manpreet. Now, in India, the issue of multi-cropping or monocropping to get soil fertility back, to use less water, to add nutrition to the soil. Now, when we are dealing with smallholder farmers, 1 hectare to 2 hectares, maybe 5 hectares, if we can raise awareness, farmers would be adapt to change their practices in 1 hectare or 2 hectare. Unlike in other countries like the US and all, where they do monocropping for 100,000 hectares or so, It's much more complex. They are just growing soybean, they are growing corn and they've been doing for season on season. It's much more complex for them to change their farming practices because they've built up the entire infrastructure around one crop. In India, I think the resilience of the farmers is much more, so long as the right kind of technology awareness inputs is provided. It's much easier for a smallholder farmer to be able to adapt and be resilient and change practices.
Right. Thanks, Arindam. I think there was a comment, for you, Venu, where the comment is that problems in agri are seen as very, very geography specific. Yet Venu spoke of going global in exports, etc. Encouraging to see that the solutions are scalable. I don't think you need to react to it. It was more like a comment for you. So the other question I have is, entrepreneurs need to work across the value chain for impact. How to enable collaboration among entrepreneurs across the value chain, technology, behavior change? Thoughts?
I think if I can take a stab, look, we have more than 30 odd portfolio companies. And one thing what I like about the agri sector is that entrepreneurs are just desperate about competition. They tend to work together. The sector has so many problems across every part of the value chain that it is impossible for any one organization or any one startup to solve everything. And entrepreneurs realize that, and they are early stage of their company itself journey. They start working together. So I think partnership in agri-tech is natural. I don't think, unlike, there is nothing like we're going to say, I'm going to create an IP which not be replicated by others, right? So it's natural. So I think more and more, I think we are seeing more startups understanding the limitations of what they have but also appreciates the value of owning the customer as a whole. I think they are coming together to become more collaborative in nature than as compared to other sectors. That's what I would like to put in.
And if I can add to Dinesh, I think I totally agree in terms of the collaborative mindset of model startup, which is great. I don't see that in many other sectors. But I would also like to make a point that only startup collaboration is not enough. We need to pull in multiple stakeholders. I'll give you one example. I think one interesting project that we've initiated as part of World Bank WRG group on climate resilience. It's in Nandurbar district of Maharashtra, where we want to demonstrate that climate finance-based incentives works for farmers. Just by start, so I can't comment whether it's going to be successful or not. But what we tried to do, we got to agri-tech startup, Bharat Agri in Krishnam, to provide farmer advisory on climate. And what we brought together is also a local FPO, which can help disseminate this information to multiple farmers. We got local district administration involved. We got local NABARD office involved. Financing is going to be facilitated by Sammunity, and of course, Rabo Bank has guarantee fund to Sammunity, so whenever Rabo is involved. VNV Advisory, which is a very climate-focused advisory, and they do trade carbon credits in places like Singapore, etc. They are going to be involved, and they're in fact investing a lot of money in making this pilot happen. So look at the number of stakeholders which are involved to get a pilot going. So I think that is the approach we probably need to have if we want to see large-scale adoption. It's not going to happen by startups alone. I think it's too much to expect, though their intent is there. But we need to get other stakeholders, and I think participation of local ecosystem, FPOs, NGOs, district administration is extremely critical, in addition to the financial institutions who can support this initiative.
Can I just want to, build on this. This is like absolutely true. We have actually, for the first time, we never done this before, but we're doing a climate resilient smallholder farmer focused accelerator, which is actually supported by a couple of people on this panel, Arindam, Rabobank, as well as Hemendra providing support on that. What we are watching there, and it's actually what just Hemendra mentioned, it's how are people forging, it's about having the technology, they are very early stage. But is there thinking about also how they're going to scale it? And that will automatically lead them to think about collaborations and partnerships across the value chain. That answer to the question, I think it's very difficult otherwise to fix the issues. As I said, if someone is working on an input, I think it's very difficult for them to just make that solution fly unless they think the other parts of the jigsaw and at least do it themselves if they can, which is not easy for everyone to do everything. Most importantly, forge partnerships which are required in this. I think it's super important from a business model perspective. I think that's kind of what we are watching, and we'll see how the results come out. They are still in acceleration stage, and hope to share the insights with the people here, and just look forward to that.
Thanks, Mahesh. And Hemendra, I think there is a question for you. Could you please elaborate on what tech could enable such high prices for fairly traded products? How do we react to that?
I think there is enough tech. I don't think it's a question of tech. It's a question of adoption. How many supply chain players want to be transparent? Let's face it. How many procurement departments, even within large corporates, how do they like transparency, right? Do the traders like transparency? So I think it's more of a behavioral change that has to happen in the supply chain. Tech is available, and clearly blockchain is one of them which I've seen, and I've seen blockchain has the capability to capture invoices at multiple level of supply chain. When farmer sells, when a wholesaler sells, or when a trader in mandi sells, I think that all because all that information can be recorded. So you have a complete chain in terms of how much farmer got and how much consumer is paying. The question is, are supply chain members on board in revealing that information, right? I think that is where the challenge is. I don't think technology is challenge at all.
Right, thanks, Hemendra. I think Arindam, you alluded to that. This next question is about what do you think about using crop waste for circular economy solutions that can be inputted into businesses? Does it have business potential?
Absolutely. I mean, that's what now, whole of Europe is doing across sectors, not only agriculture. In India, I think we are seeing some green shoots in terms of the circular economy because, it's resource efficient, it's climate smart, and it adds to the bottom line and top line of businesses. So it's extremely important. Again, as Hemendra said, this is a huge opportunity for entrepreneurs because it's still, absolutely virgin territory in India, that for entrepreneurs to come and to look at the circularity, circular use, we are making financing, debt financing available for such initiatives, and to be able to look at the way resources, they don't have the typical, beginning of life and end of life cycle, but they are used as input for other kind of productive use. So it's extremely important to get that right, especially in agriculture, keeping in view food loss and waste, the impact it has on incomes, it has on the national economy, and it has on climate.
Right, thanks, Arindam. And I think I'm cognizant of time. Let this be the last question. So, how can transition de-risking finance for farmers be supported or encouraged in India? For example, structures like the one offered by Perennial Fund. If anyone would like to comment on that.
Well, let me take the first step at it. I'm not aware of what the perennial fund means, but what I would say is it's time for financial institutions to put on the climate lens. Right now, it's just an underwriting, criteria. Okay, if I get my money back, it's fine. I'll provide the money provided I get sufficient interest. But it's extremely, extremely important that not only look at the credit risk, but also look at the climate risk and put on the climate lens. It's only then that we will have more of climate financing going out to the different agri stakeholders. Now, having said that, a point which was made earlier by other speakers was that how do we incentivize the farmers and other players in the upstream part of the supply chain to adopt climate smart practices? And that's where I guess carbon trading needs to have credible platforms, needs to have transparency on how do we trade carbon credits, and if the farmers are generating carbon credits, could that be a revenue stream for them? The experiment that Hemendra spoke of in Maharashtra, that's going to look at that how do we financially incentivize the farmers to be able to have more streams of income by being sustainable, by being climate smart. It's extremely important, and that's something the global agriculture sector is struggling with. There are a lot of interesting experiments going on in the African continent where large corporates like Microsoft and others, they are buying, carbon credit generated at smallholder farmers. And if that's again another opportunity in the Indian agriculture sector, and I'm sure there are a couple of startups who are working on that, but then we don't have regulations, we don't have standards around that.
Right. So I've already taken 10 minutes out of your schedule. So I would like to thank each one of you for being so interactive, bringing forth so many issues. I think this is a very vast topic altogether. I think 1 hour is probably not enough to discuss, the variety of issues that, the sector has, as well as what, overlay the climate change brings into adding further complexities. So thank you very much for being so wonderful and interactive. And I hope to catch up with each one of you, over a coffee maybe in the coming days. But let me hand it over to Kalpesh now to conclude. Kalpesh.
Thank you, Manpreet.
Thanks a lot. Thanks, Manpreet. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Manpreet, for a very well moderated session, and thanks to all of you for such an insightful and such an interactive session. And also thank you to the audience for being so engaged and so interactive. In fact, the energy in the session was very evident with the number of questions which kept popping up. There's a lot of takeaways for sure. We heard people saying that there are lots of problems. I mean, climate is complex, agriculture is probably even more complex. But the good thing is that we heard that there's no dearth of entrepreneurship. We also heard, statements that there's no dearth of technology as well for getting to solutions. There are innovations, and probably there are more innovations which need to come up. And in fact, there are innovations which need to be unearthed. They are there, but they need to be unearthed. So some of those, propositions coming up, very important, messages around a partnership, which kept, getting discussed several times, and partnership across for-profit and the non-profit sector. Probably this is one sector where the need for for-profit and development to coming together is, more than many other subsectors. Some interesting experiments already in place. The one which Hemendra mentioned with multi-stakeholders coming in together. So definitely more exciting days ahead. And just to conclude, I think Jinesh made a very fair point that climate change is not really a farmer's problem alone. I mean, it's for all of us to come together. So hopefully this session and many more in the future will be like those steps forward in bringing that, partnerships and collaborations together. So once again, thank you. And to the audience, for the next session in Audio 1. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.